Hey everyone, welcome to my PMP videos. Today we are going to talk about story point estimation. By now we all know what is user story. User story is a set of feature that is available to the end users. And how do we estimate an user story? That's what we are going to see now. But before that, we all remember an user story should meet invest criteria. I for independent, N for non-negotiable, V for valuable, E for estimable, S for small, and T for testable. Estimating a story point is like a kind of a team sport. We involve all the team members from developer to tester to scrum master. And story points is not directly related in terms of days or hours. Typically, story points take into account the three factors that can impact a task's scope and effort, such as risk and complexity and repetition. What is an advantage of estimating an story points? There is no relative estimation in terms of days and hours. Estimating in days and hours doesn't account for any non-project related activities, such as risk, complexity, and repetition, which we discussed before. Story points focused on shipping value than spending time. Now let's see what are the different ways to estimate a story. How do we determine story points? Firstly, determine the size of a user story in product backlog based on t-shirt size, which could be XL, medium, large, small, or extra small. Or it could be a Fibonacci sequence, such as 1, 2, 3, 5. Or we can create a story point matrix based on risk, uncertainty, complexity, and dependency. And we can hold a planning poker method. So here is a story point matrix based on amount of effort, amount of time, task complexity, and uncertainty. For example, an user story with minimum effort that takes only few minutes of their time and little complexity will go for one story point. Remember, the story point is not related to days. When they say one story point, it is not considered as one day. In the future slides, we are going to see how to determine this in terms of number of days. And again, an user story with severe effort takes a week of time with medium complexity and moderate risk could go up to 8 story points. If you see, the story points are all determined in terms of Fibonacci sequence. First of all, this needs to be determined and provided to the developer and the entire team members. Then you have a planning poker method. How do we do planning poker meeting? It's a deck of cards in Fibonacci sequence numbers. A deck of cards is these days available in Amazon as well. You just call up for a meeting with all the team members, discuss the user story, understand the objective, determine the acceptance criteria and definition of done. Once the user story is discussed and what the success looks like, each team member should open their poker card at the same time. If the story point aligns, move on to the next user story. If the story points don't align, continue to discuss until you reach an agreement. Repeat the process until you have assigned story point to all tasks in your product backlog. Using a story point matrix as a baseline, determine how many tasks your team can complete in the upcoming sprint. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, first of all, the story point is determined in terms of t-shirt sizes or in the Fibonacci sequence. And determine the story point matrix and have a planning poker method. If you remember, the story point is not directly related in terms of days and hours. Let's see how to determine the number of days in the next slide. Before determining the number of days, we should know what is velocity. What is velocity in Scrum? Velocity is the total amount of work a team can deliver during the sprint. For example, in sprint 1, we have taken up 3 user stories. but only 2 of them were fully completed. We have determined a story point of 6, 4, and 8 to be completed in a particular sprint, which is the total user story points of 18. But then what was actually delivered during the sprint? It was just 14 user points. So the velocity is the total amount of work a team can deliver during the sprint. And here in this case, the velocity of sprint 1 is 14, which is 6 plus 8. How do we optimize this calculation? For example, in a sprint of 10 days or 2 weeks, assume that velocity is 20 points for that sprint. And first we will calculate the average velocity per sprint, which is velocity divided by sprint. 20 by 10 is 2. Your average velocity per sprint is 2. We have a story estimated for 3 story points. For example, let's assume a user story 1 is estimated for 3 story points, story point 3. Here is the prediction for the number of days you could potentially take. Number of days per story is estimation divided by average velocity, which is your number of story points estimation divided by your velocity, which is 3 by 2 is 1.5 days. Before determining the number of days, we will have to see the velocity at least for the first 2 sprints, 2 to 3 sprints, to determine how much we can deliver in one particular sprint. So take an average of that, determine your velocity, determine your average velocity per sprint, and we can come up with this formula to calculate the number of days per story. Hope you like my video. Thank you so much.